security services. Information on all that Xfinity has to offer in the Westfield area is available online at xfinity.com.
We thank the generosity of our underwriters. For more information, please contact the Westfield State Foundation at 413-572-8646. Wednesday mornings start off right from 6 to 8 a.m. with Tina Gorman and Wake Up Wednesday.
Community Radio
89.5 WSKB. Live from the campus of Westfield State University, this is 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Auerbach in Arts Beat Radio here on 89.5 FM WSKB here at Westfield State University. Peter Coles is our engineer this morning. We've got a good program for you. We're going to go backstage at two area theaters. For the first half hour, we're going to be down at Goodspeed Musicals with Mark Adam Rampmeyer, who has designed the wigs for The Drowsy Chaperone, which is the musical currently running. And in our second half hour, we're going to meet the set designer Juliana von Haubrick, who has designed the play Anne for a Wham Theater, which opens this month at Shakespeare and Company in Lenox, Massachusetts. And she's also designing a play at Westfield State University. So we'll get a chance to find out what's going on in their theater department in a couple of buildings over. So without much ado, we're going down to East Haddam, Connecticut, and Mark Rampmeyer. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Well, you've done a lot of design of wigs and hair for Broadway, Lysistrata Jones, and 2009 revival of West Side Story, and you did work at Theater Works with The Legend of Georgia McBride, and now several shows at Goodspeed. How did you get involved in this kind of design work?
It was sort of a long journey. I actually started when I was about 9 as a dancer and doing some drama club work after school, just to be involved in some activities, and really found that I excelled at it. And through the years, trying different departments, hair and makeup sort of was always appealing to me. Because it was so creative. I liked being able to develop different characters and stuff like that. And as my mom would tell you, I always had a knack for the gore makeup at Halloween. So it sort of seems like a natural progression once I stopped performing and went behind the scenes that I ended up in this field.
So you're, in designing The Drowsy Chaperone, I know it's a musical. I know it's a rather big musical. How long did it take you to do the designs? Did you have to wait till you saw the actors and design for a specific actor? Or did you start your work before the play was cast?
It's a little bit of both in the process that I go through. As soon as I know what project I'm going to be working on, and sometimes that can be years in advance, like you mentioned, Lysistrata Jones that I did. That was actually nearly a 3-year journey before it reached Broadway, of the creative team working on that, just in development. But you read the piece, you do your research, you get to know as much as you can about it. So for The Drowsy Chaperone, you start looking at the 20s, the 30s, the movies that were produced then, fashion, movie stars. And then Greg Barnes and I, the costume designer, discussed what the aesthetic value of the show was going to be, because it can go a couple different ways. Sometimes the design team really wants it to be period accurate and very specific. Sometimes we want to glamorize that. Sometimes you want it to be a very natural view of the times. But what's exciting about Drowsy Chaperone is that it's a little bit fantasy, and so it loosened those reins a little bit. And something that Greg and I really wanted to do was really glamorize the period and the 20s, and not just the period itself, but our actual performers. So I was able to sort of have my Lego blocks laid out as to what I wanted to try and incorporate. Then, once I actually met each member of the company, I could finalize what I wanted to do with color and style and length and those types of things to put them in the best image available to them when they're on stage portraying these characters. And I get a lot of feedback from the actors. Little things like they'll say, I like to have bangs, I like to have my forehead covered, to don't ever put me in a blonde wig. I wore one once years ago, and it's awful. And I really sort of take that information to heart, because they have to wear whatever I create 8 times a week. And not only do they need to feel like the character they're portraying in it, but they have to feel really good about themselves. So it's a blend of all of those things.
I would assume, and maybe incorrectly, but I would assume that if you're going to wear a wig in everyday life, you would take care of it in a different way than you would take care of a wig where you're singing and dancing and working up a sweat intensely over a 2.5 or 3 hour period of time.
It's a very different approach. Prior to working at Goodspeed, when I was in New York, I had quite a few clientele that were going through chemotherapy. And that whole approach to designing and building wigs for that purpose is completely different. Theater is certainly a little tougher on the wigs I build. And because of that, we use a variety of materials, from human hair to synthetic hair when it's appropriate, and sometimes even yak hair can be used. In our upcoming production of A Connecticut Christmas Carol, I use a lot of yak hair for the ghosts that are portrayed. It holds up really well. It has sort of a non-human feel to it, which is great when you're trying to depict a character like that. And it's a little bit easier to maintain.
Do you just design the wigs, or do you actually maintain them during the course of a run of a show?
I design and build almost all of our stuff. I will sometimes have to get some outside help because the shows, as you said, are large here and a little bit overwhelming for one person. But no, we have currently Taylor Weiner is our hair and makeup supervisor, and she is backstage 8 shows a week, making sure the design that I've handed her is maintained and consistent all week long. So she comes in, runs the shows, washes them, shampoos them, resets them, and makes sure that once I sort of sign off on the show that it looks the way I want it to, then she's responsible for maintaining it for the remainder of our run.
Now, I know that Goodspeed is known for its costume shop, and they'll do a musical or 2 or 3 or 4, and they have them stored in a costume shop so a costume can be used for another production or rented out and all of that. But what about the wigs? I mean, is there how many wigs does Goodspeed have, or do you do it for that production and then it's over?
They're very customized. We do have a small selection of wigs that have come to the Opera House through generous donations of people who have given us shows from Broadway, things like that. They don't have a great shelf life. If you're not using them, they tend to sort of disintegrate over time. They're not quite as sturdy as the costumes that have come in with those packages. They're also very customized. I hand tie almost all the hairlines for every wig that comes in. So we may be able to use the back of a wig over and over again, but there are very few things that make it onto our stage that haven't been completely customized to the actor. Our front row, where the audience sits, is really close to the stage, and the last thing I want to do is have a bad wig or something that doesn't look natural sort of interrupt that experience for our audience. I heard a saying once years ago that I've sort of stood by, and that wigs should be seen and not heard. And that basically means you don't want people to know they're looking at wigs on stage. A lot of times when people are commenting about the wigs, it means that they've detracted from the story in a negative way rather than help tell the story. So if somebody comes and sees Drowsy Chaperone and goes, oh, it never even dawned on me that wasn't their own hair, then I'm successful.
In a case like the Drowsy Chaperone, how many people are utilizing wigs and how many people are utilizing their own hair?
There's only a few members of the male ensemble that are actually utilizing their own hair. Several of our male principals are wigged, and all of the women in our company are wigged, with multiple wigs sometimes.
If somebody's using their own hair, for example, would you style it for them and teach them how to do that, or is that someone else's role?
No, we would help them with that, get them set up, and then they'll maintain it. Anything that becomes too elaborate, we generally tend to move towards a wig. It's really difficult to maintain your hair consistently for 8 shows a week, as you mentioned earlier, when you're singing and dancing and sweating and running and quick changes and dresses over your head and back down again. And we just find that to keep the show consistent so that our audience sees the same show 8 times a week, anything that's more elaborate than, basically a little hair gel and some hairspray, we'll go ahead and make a wig for that so that it remains the same throughout the run.
One thing I've noticed, and it's because as a theater reporter now, I get to sit down front. When I just went to the theater as an audience member, I could be up in the balcony. I noticed that a lot of people have microphones taped into their hair or their wigs. Do you have to design around that, or is that something that's just state-of-the-art these days?
No, I work very closely with Jay Hilton, our sound designer here at Goodspeed. I'm very lucky that he is so collaborative because we've actually come up with a system here. Our microphone transmitters are very small, and we fit those into the wig prep underneath the wig. They're about the size of 3 AA batteries. And he recently had a bunch of custom-made microphone cables made so that it's only about 16 inches long and we can coil it under the wig. And this way you don't see any cables going down the backs of people's necks. They don't get in the way during quick changes. And he will design the color of the mic to match either the hair or the skin tone of the actor so that it becomes as invisible as possible. And then I always try to help him out a little bit by making sure the placement is the most efficient for the sound. And then sometimes I'll add a wave or I'll add a little curl or something so that we can get the best position and really disguise the microphone. Again, we don't want that element to distract from the show too much, but you need to be able to hear everybody. So it's a nice collaboration between myself and the sound designer.
How many shows have you done at Goodspeed approximately?
I think I hit somewhere around 20 last year, so I'm probably 23, 24 now, 25 maybe. A lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. How far in advance do you start working on the particular shows, and are you designing more than one show at a time?
I usually have on my plate anywhere between 6 and 7 productions that are in some state of development. I'm working on our last show. I have some research materials that's sitting in front of me as we speak for our last show of the season next year, which is Billy Elliot. People don't generally think of wigs and Billy Elliot, but it actually is a period show, a very distinctive look and time that story revolves around. And so I start getting ideas into my head as soon as possible. So I've got in my office what's called a research wall. So once we announce our season, all my information goes up. So I've got music and DVDs from the Music Man. I've got, which was funny, I've got a book that was given to me when I was a little kid because of Winn-Dixie that I've always loved. That's our second musical. And so I put those things up on the wall. And as the years and months go by leading up to that, any sort of research or something that reminds me of the show or something that I learn about the show, I make a note or I print the picture and I put it with that particular show. Then when the creative team and I first meet, and sometimes that's, we're close to doing that for Music Man next year, so almost a year out, all of those ideas become part of our discussions, and I try to incorporate as many things as I like into the design, and I try to offer as many suggestions to the creative process as I can. So it's quite a ways out. And like for some of the things I do at Theater Works, the Christmas on the Rocks that we do up there annually, Rob Ruggiero is very, very good about thinking a year ahead. So we sort of knew that there was going to be a new character in it this year. So all year long, I've been thinking about what that might be and what it might look like, so that when we begin the creative process on developing the new character, I've got all my information and research ready to go.
I'm really looking forward to that. I've seen it and covered it probably 3 times since Rob put that together, and I think it's one of the funniest plays or series of playlets I've ever seen. And I did notice I did notice your wig work for that, because the elf's hair never moves.
Well, if we do it right, it never moves. We've had a few slips and some mishaps that show those costume changes are incredibly quick, with full costume changes, full wig changes. So we only have the length of time, obviously, to prepare one character while the other character is on stage talking. But so that's quite the process.
The thing I found interesting about Christmas on the Rocks and the costuming and the wigs, it was meant to be very funny. And when the Clara from the Nutcracker comes out, and it's very obvious that she's costumed in a period and over-wigged. I mean, I think Dolly Parton would have been envious of those curls and everything. It was wigs and hair with a sense of humor, which you would not necessarily see in another production that you're doing. Are you based at Goodspeed now? Is that like your home base, or do you go with a lot of different theaters over the course of a year?
Goodspeed is my home now. I was lucky enough that in 2014, I was offered the position at Goodspeed to become their new costume rental manager, and that sort of went hand in hand with the design work that I had been doing. I started designing for Goodspeed back in 2008 with their Opera House production of Happy Days, which had transferred over from the Terrace, and sort of fell in love with it, and they brought me back as a freelance designer for many, many productions. And then a few years ago, I got a phone call, and Michael Price asked me if I wanted a desk job, and I had no idea what that meant as a designer. And so I came up and interviewed. I was actually designing at Hartford Stage Company at the time, so I was only a quick car trip away, and we talked about it. And I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting into, and it turned into a really wonderful position here for myself. And after 2 years, they offered me the position as resident hair and makeup designer, and I bought a house and settled in, and pretty much have been counting my blessings ever since. It's a challenging job, and it keeps me busy, but I'm lucky. I don't know a lot of people who go to work every day with as much excitement as I do. I really, I love being here, and I love being surrounded by the arts the way I am. And it certainly has its challenges. I don't want to sound too Mary Sunshine. We recently had a fight with Mother Nature that she won.
I was going to ask you about that because I mean, we had a lot of rain here at the same time, but I guess it was last week. There was serious flooding in East Haddam and the area around Goodspeed, and it did a lot of damage, not to the main theater, but to the costume shops and the music library and such. What did that do to your work?
We're still not sure, honestly. I've had a studio flood before and things like that. I have never seen this type of damage by water before. I walked into our costume rental facility and just walked up and down every aisle to make sure that the wind and the rain hadn't gotten in, and that was all good. And I thought I should head down to mid-campus to our costume shop just to make sure that nothing had really happened, because we have had incidents with floodwater and things like that sneaking in before, and had no idea what I was walking into. The road was completely shut down. The shoulder of the road between our rehearsal studio and the main road had completely washed out. There were trees in the road. There were pianos turned over. There was sound equipment laying in the middle of the street that the water had rushed out of our rehearsal studio. And then I walked into the costume shop into about 2 inches of standing mud.
Oh, my.
And my heart just sort of sunk. Any costume that was longer, closer than 2 feet to the floor, was covered in mud and water. All of our custom shoes that we had selected to possibly used in Drowsy Chaperone were covered in mud. There were anything that was plastic floated enough that it tipped over. So there were wigs that I had built there, custom lace front human hair wigs that were laying in mud puddles, essentially. So we are in the process of trying to clean and save and restore as much of that as we can. But our recovery team has actually pulled some parts of the building down to the very foundation. You can stand in our telemarketing area and look through into the basement now. So we're really back to zero in those departments as far as establishing the building and getting them back up and running. But we have a great team here. We have amazing community support for Goodspeed Foundation, and once again, the Goodspeed family has rallied together, and we'll pull through this, and we'll be bigger and better and ready hopefully for Mother Nature next time.
But it did not impact the Opera House itself in terms of performances of Drowsy Chaperone.
Not directly. The Opera House continued on. We had 2 shows that the flood happened Tuesday evening, sometime around 8:30, we think, is when the road actually went out and everything. And we had a matinee and an evening show the next day. Unfortunately, some of our actors were displaced out of their housing because of the flooding that happened. And some of them spent the night with our line producer in her guest house. Donald and Hilton was a host to them. Some of them stayed in other parts of our company housing that hadn't been affected by the flood. But it was a rough night for everybody just out of concern of what was happening. So it was a sleepless night, but the cast rallied forward and I think gave one of our best performances to date so far of this production because, actors and theater folks have always sort of had that nothing's going to stop us. The show must go on.
Of course, that's the whole motto of show business. The show has to go on.
Absolutely.
We should just tell people that The Drowsy Chaperone is the current musical at Goodspeed. It runs through Thanksgiving weekend, but that doesn't mean you should wait and buy tickets because it's a hit. It was a big hit on Broadway, and it doesn't get performed that often. So go to the website for Goodspeed, which is goodspeed.org. And I suspect that if you go to the website and you wanted to help Goodspeed out in cleaning up after this flood damage, which really did a lot of damage to the town of East Haddam, there's information on the website where how you can make a donation to help the cause. And we have to take a real quick break here. This is 89.5 FM. WSKB and Artsbeat Radio, but we're going to save our underwriting announcements until the half hour. So we want to make sure that we thank the people that make this kind of programming and community radio possible here on WSKB. We're talking with Mark Adam Ratmeyer, who is the wig and hair designer for The Drowsy Chaperone and many other productions at Goodspeed and Theater Works in Hartford and some of the area things. You made a choice to move up here to Connecticut and work in Connecticut. Do you find that the area is very supportive of the creative economy and artists like yourself?
I do. I was actually surprised, and all of my New York friends are like, I can't believe you're moving into the middle of the woods, I can't believe you're doing this. But, I mean, first of all, East Haddam, where I live and work, is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that part of it can't be denied. And then, I had also previously worked at Theater Works, Hartford Stage Company, Goodspeed, before I became a Connecticut resident. So I knew that there was active theater up here. But once I got involved, suddenly more people were knocking on the door and saying, hey, we could really use some help with some wig design. And I was amazed at not just all of the professional theater, but the theater that happens here at college level, and the community theater level, and the high schools that are involved in just really, really doing good professional productions. We've worked with Valley Regional High School, costuming some of their shows. We've done costumes for a high school in Deep River, which is a town or so over from us. And it is amazing, just everyone that is involved in the whole aspect of this, and how many people from New York support the arts in our area, the Eugene O'Neill Center. There are things all over, and there's art to be discovered without looking too hard. And some of the productions up here are really unique. Long Wharf Theater, like, we're all a stone's throw away. I saw an amazing production of Sweeney Todd at UConn with Terry Mann, who I worked with on Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. And so it really is the best of Broadway up here. We just happen to be in Connecticut. And the work that I do at Goodspeed is just as rewarding, if not more rewarding, than some of the Broadway shows that I did, because we have to be creative. We have to fight for every production to make it good, to keep the arts alive. So I think they're alive and well. I think the community supports them. I think we couldn't do it without that support. That's become very obvious, that, you know, our independent donors, the people that are contributing to our Save the Studio Fund, are helping us get back on our feet. But just the people that are buying tickets and going to a show are the people that are keeping these theaters alive. And working in all these different venues, I hear the artistic directors or the executive directors saying, you know, every ticket counts, come see a show. And it's the absolute truth. It's the public that keeps the arts alive in Connecticut. And I think they're doing a great job. I hope they continue.
One last question for you. Do you have a wish list of plays or musicals that you would love to design given the opportunity? Is there one show in particular that you really hope you get to cross paths with?
It would be my very first Broadway show as a hairstylist. I fell into completely by accident, was The Phantom of the Opera, which is still running. And I was hired as an emergency swing on that show, and got to end up running it for several months. And I think if there's ever a time when that one is released to be produced by regional theaters or community theaters or anything, I'd love to revisit that. I've had a really great career, and have been thankful for luck and favors and the kindness of others. And it just would really make it go full circle for me, I think, to recreate a show like that. I love the classics. I love 42nd Street. Getting to do West Side Story at the Palace was really great. I've done a lot of my favorites. So I don't know. Sometimes I look forward to the new ones. I'm looking forward to Because of Winn-Dixie to see what that becomes. I've done Hairspray, which everybody always thinks is a hair designer's dream. So I've been really lucky. I think I've done a lot of my favorites. I guess I'm waiting for the new one. That would be the new one. A brand new one I've never done before.
Okay,
that's really exciting to do.
That's fair enough. Thanks for joining us this morning. We've been talking with Mark Adam Rampmeyer, who designed the wigs and the hair for the Drowsy Chaperone, currently running at Goodspeed Musicals through Thanksgiving weekend. Get ticket information for that at goodspeed.org. We're going to take a quick break here to acknowledge the underwriters who support community radio here on 89.5 FM WSKB. So go refill your coffee cups, and we'll be right back.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Bay State Dental. Comprehensive dentistry at 14 convenient locations in Springfield, Chicopee, Longmeadow, West Springfield, Belchertown, East Longmeadow, Ludlow, Northampton, Greenfield, and Wilbraham, as well as 29 Broad Street in Westfield. Bay State Dental makes it a priority to help you achieve and maintain the healthy smile you deserve. On the web at baystatedental.com. Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
We thank the generosity of our underwriters. For more information, please contact the Westfield State Foundation at 413-572-8646. Discussions of local politics, events, happenings, and miscellany potpourri. Ken's Den, Tuesday, 8 to 10. Live from the campus of Westfield State University, this is 89.5 FM, WSKB, Westfield.
Welcome back, everyone, to Arts Beat Radio. I'm Mark Auerbach here in the studio this morning with Peter Coles. Next Friday on Arts Beat Radio, for those of you that are interested in film and those of you that are interested in theater, we'll have an opportunity to find out how you get that part or how you get your screenplay in front of a major studio. Diane Perlman from the Berkshire Film and Media Collaborative will be here to talk about their upcoming Western Mass Film and Media Exchange, which will deal with screenwriters and how you make your pitch to studio agents and studio people. So if you're working on a screenplay that you'd love to have Steven Spielberg take a peek at and read, this particular seminar will help you make that pitch. We'll also be meeting with Jeffrey Dreisbach from McCorkle Casting in New York that casts some of the major theater events around the country as well as television, and learn what it takes to make the perfect audition. So I think it's going to be a how-to program next week in Arts Beat Radio. Today we're talking with backstage and designers, and I'm excited about our next guest, Juliana von Hobrecht, and I hope I pronounced your name right, but you can certainly correct it. If you've seen plays like I and You at Chester, which was one of my favorites, or Disgraced at Chester this past season, or Heisenberg at Shakespeare and Company, or the upcoming production of Anne at Wham Theater, Juliana's the the set designer, and she's also designing something here at Westfield State University, so we're going to have to find out about that. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me, first of all, I know nothing about what you're designing at Westfield State, and the theater's just a couple of buildings away, so fill me in on that.
They've asked me to design their fall show, and their fall show is called Oh Beautiful by Teresa Rebick. Teresa's kind of a hot new playwright. She's got a play on Broadway right now. And this play was commissioned by a company in Delaware for her. And it's an amazing play about a young man going through school dealing with bullying, and a young girl going through school dealing with teenage pregnancy, and parents wrestling with the issues of guns and violence. And there's even a Rush Limbaugh character who talks to all the founding fathers. So it's a kind of an amazing play. So I highly recommend it.
Well, we'll have to find out more about it and talk about it a little bit on Arts Beat Radio. You came to the Berkshires, I understand, around 2004. What brought you here to Western Massachusetts?
Escape from New York City, I guess is really the gist of it. I had quite an experience in New York City, and especially on 9/11. So that kind of rattled me enough that I felt like, I really wanted to slow down and, as they say, stop and smell the roses. And there are a lot of them up here in the Berkshires, so I was really happy to come here. My husband found a job here, so we moved up here right away.
I know other people who have said that. And as somebody, I'm not quite in the Berkshires, but more in the Valley. How do you find Western Massachusetts and the opportunity to work in the creative economy here? Is there a lot of work, or do you have to leave the area to find projects?
No, there's a lot of work, and that surprised me because, quite frankly, when we moved up here, I was kind of thinking I would take a break from theater and see what other creative endeavor I might find. I tried book illustrating for a while, and I illustrated a children's book while I was up here. So there is so much up here that you could get into trouble with. So there's no shortage of projects.
Now, you work frequently at Chester Theater, and I've worked with Kristen Van Ginhoven from Wham, and now you're designing for Wham of the play called Anne, which a lot of people don't know much about, but just to kind of briefly, Holland Taylor, the actor who you've probably seen from 2.5 Men, wrote a one-person show about the Texas governor, Ann Richards. And Wham has chosen to do this production, and I believe it's a co-production with a theater company in Vermont. And did you design both the production in Vermont and this?
Yes, yeah. The production in Vermont was the end of their summer season, so that was over Labor Day weekend, and it just sold out. It was an incredible production, and Jane Atkinson is the person who's playing Ann Richards, and really, literally, she was meant to play this role. I mean, she really was meant to play that role. She got standing ovations every night in Dorset, and I enjoyed every rehearsal. And I don't say that about many shows. I enjoyed every single rehearsal for Anne.
And she's a nationally known actor who also makes the Berkshires her home. Had you worked with her before or known her before you went into rehearsals?
Yes. Lucky for Wham, and this is just to clarify, I've actually been Wham's scenic designer from day one, from the very first production that we did in 2009. So I've been working with Kristen since 2009, and Kristen is actually the reason that I worked at Chester. I pretty much go where Kristen goes.
Well, yeah,
designers.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
I mean, I become a real follower and supporter of Wham, and I got the first show that I saw at Chester many years was I and You, which she directed, and then again Disgraced. I sort of follow her around to see what she's doing stage-wise and realized that you were always designing her productions.
Yeah, I always think of it like a little bit like a marriage, because with scenic designers, your work really comes from the directors that you make relationships with. Directors, you know, it is a true collaboration in terms of what the final picture looks like on stage. In terms of blocking, too, because I have to imagine all the blocking ahead of time. So Kristen and I kind of feel like we have one brain, in a way, you know, two halves of one brain. When we approach stories, it's very easy. It's like shorthand, the way we talk. So,
how much time do you have to design a show? For example, when did Kristen decide that she was going to direct Anne, and how much time did that give you to design it for two different theaters?
yeah, you know, it's interesting because it's different for different companies. For Wham, we do two productions. We're trying to do two productions a year. So I get a lot more lead time on those shows because we know ahead of time what we're doing. For Anne, I remember Kristen calling me in February. We had already known about this play because it was in our kind of pool of plays that we wanted to do. She called me about this play because she had sent it to Jane to see if Jane would be interested in directing it, knowing that Jane is so busy. Jane read it, and she said, "Are you kidding? I'm going to play this. I don't direct it. I want to be Anne." So she asked Kristen to direct it. And Kristen called me up frantic and said, "Do you think we can do this? Can we do this in two different places? Dorset wants to do a co-production, which will help us budget-wise build the set. And then can we take that set and can we put it in Shakespeare and Company?" And we went through everything that we had in our stock because we have to reuse a lot of our stock. And I said, you know what? I think we can do this. I think it's very, you know, we can make it very minimal. We can make it so that it expands and contracts. We've got this great portal that we've used before. So I kind of convinced her that it was possible, and I'm really glad I did because it's such an amazing show.
You know, obviously you've seen the Vermont production. Will it change at all from what was done at Dorset to the time it opens at Wham?
Yes, a little bit. at Dorset, we followed Pride and Prejudice, and they had this beautiful wood floor that their scenic painter had painted. So we kind of left that and painted over it with a Texas emblem. And so that won't be with us at Shakespeare and Company. We're going to do something different with the floor. We're going to turn it into sort of a giant faded Texas flag. So that will be different. It's a little bit less deep at Shakespeare and Company. So Jane is going to lose a couple of feet downstage. But Jane wanted to be closer to the audience anyway. She loves having that connection with the audience. So I think it's going to be even more amazing. It's going to be even more intimate. And people are just going to be blown away, I think.
How many shows are you working on at any given time? I mean, I know that you had a lot of leeway and lead time with Anne, but what about the shows? I mean, you had a show at Chester, you had one at Shakespeare and Company. How many shows are on your palette at one point?
This year it was 5 for the year, 3 for the summer, and then 2 on either end of the summer. So it usually is about 5 shows a year. That's my max. And for Chester, they let me know in March. They talked to Kristen and I in March. We sort of knew that they were going to ask us to come back. We just didn't know what show they were going to ask us to do. So, yeah, in March was when we started thinking about Disgraced. And it's interesting because I made sure to take a big chunk of time off to think about Disgraced because it's a very heavy play, as you know. And my first approach to it was to come from the perspective of the female, the wife, and I think it was because I was overemphasizing with her in a way. So I created this apartment that was for her and not for him, and it was funny because Daniel called me on it, and I think it was because of my personal take on the play. So I had to redesign it from the perspective of a lawyer, So that was kind of an interesting challenge for me. It was a hard play to do.
It was a fascinating play to see, but a very difficult one as well. I mean, it took on so many things, but I found the set kind of interesting because it's what I imagined a New York apartment of an up-and-coming, successful lawyer to look like.
Yeah, and like I said, I think I put way too much of her in the apartment to begin with. And I think that was me overcompensating because I felt so much for her. And she's an artist, and I'm an artist, so I started putting all this artwork in there. And Daniel was right to kind of rein me back and say, I think this is more about him and his ambition. She's along for the ride, really, and her stuff may be somewhere else. But right now, this is about him. So I had to, refocus, reorient my thinking. So.
Now, when you're working at Wham or you're working at Shakespeare and Company or Chester, you're working with professionals. And here you're coming to Westfield State University where you'll be working with students. Do you design differently when you're working on a production that is going to be executed by students, or do you make them rise to the professional occasion?
More of the latter, I would say, because in my training, I went to Cal Arts for grad school, and it was always emphasized to us to look at the story first. Really focus on the story. Don't think about budget. Don't think about the how. Just think about the what. And once you have the what, then start thinking about the how. And if you're in a place like a college where skills and budget are tight, then you go from the what that you thought of and you start to pare it down until you get to really the essential thing that you need to do that story that school can afford and do. So.
Now, do you work with a lot of colleges, or is this a unique experience for you?
I have worked with a lot of colleges, and it's only been recently that I've done that. And I really enjoy it. I have to say, I really, really enjoy it. The students are interesting. They're really tenacious and just driven to succeed. A lot of the ones that I've come in contact with. At Westfield, I have a great scenic assistant, Maddie, who is just a go-getter. She was one of our interns at Chester this summer, and she really stood out in the interns this past summer. So when I was told that she was going to be my assistant, I was very excited.
Now, most of the plays that, at least in recent years, that you've done are contemporary plays or totally new plays to a particular area. Do you get a chance to work on some of the classics at all, or do you veer more towards contemporary theater?
Well, that's what the schools are for, the classics. So yes, I do. I get to work on some classics at the schools. I got to do Doll's House at the University of Albany, and then I got to do Hair, the musical Hair, with them this past spring. So that was a blast.
Are there what are some of the upcoming shows that you'll be designing after Anne opens?
Well, that is a very interesting question, because at the moment I don't know what Wham is going to be doing for our big 10-year anniversary next year. And I know it's going to be big, so I kind of kept my calendar open. I might be doing a production of Snow Queen at Russell Sage in the winter, their Theater Institute. But other than that, I'm waiting for the 10-year Wham year, which is going to be amazing.
I'm looking forward to that as well. When you get some downtime that you'll be getting soon, do you go see other people's productions? Do you go back into the in research periods, or do you just leave set design behind?
No, not entirely leave it behind. This may be the first winter that I'm and early spring that I don't have a production. So it's going to be a nice time, a nice downtime for me. I do like to go see other productions, but the irony is most of them are in the summer when I'm also working. So, but I've made it a mission in the past to see every Williamstown Theater Festival show, because I live in Williamstown. And I've done it before where I've seen every one of them. This year, unfortunately, I only got to see a couple that were friends of mine, their productions. But I do try to see, and that's always the sad thing for theater, busy theater artists, is we don't get to see a lot of other people's work. So we try to do it as much as we can.
Yeah, and it used to be that a theater ended here come Labor Day weekend, and it was a very seasonal thing. But now there's productions almost all year.
Yeah, I think it's, Barrington Stage has 2 beautiful stages that they can work on. And a lot of these companies, since they own space that they can use year-round, they're starting to really put programming in. They usually have to, make it very minimal, kind of lower budget or, revival-type, programming off-season, because they really want to save their budgets for the summer when they have the biggest impact.
Where do you get your inspiration for design? Do you study history in terms of theatrical history or architecture or design of the periods? Do you go to museums? Where do you find your inspiration?
Anywhere. It's amazing. That's what I love about what I do. It's more that I live in the world of architecture and installation art. I don't know if your listeners know about installation art. It's a medium of fine art. So I get inspiration from lots of places. Films. I've literally paused the film and taken a photo of the screen. So out in nature, I've taken many photos of Shakespeare and Company's dilapidated buildings. I keep a pretty big digital database of imagery. For me, the inspiration really, really comes from the story. I have to sit with that story and read it more than twice at least, and really get a sense of who they are. And I will see in my head, especially the really, really well-written plays, I will see in my head immediately images of where this is happening. And I think it's because of all the history that I've had in theater. I've seen so much theater. I've studied theater. And so when I read a play, I almost read it as though I'm the audience watching it for the first time. So I will get strong images right from then. So.
I know that when you read a script, and I don't know if a lot of our audiences actually sat down and read a script for a play, except for Shakespeare that you were required to read in ninth grade. Mm-hmm. But there are occasionally descriptions of what the playwright believes the set should look like. You know, they might say a room in an apartment or a field. You know, there's some very broad-based ideas, and some are more specific than others. Do you ever have the chance to work with a playwright and ask a playwright what they envision so that you can collaborate on that level, or is the collaboration more with the director?
Recently, it's more with the director, and, you know, we read those stage directions, and then we file them in the back of our heads. They're not our roadmap necessarily. They're just one of the possible attractions along the way, as it were. So we don't always follow what the playwright says. Sorry, playwright. But I have worked with new plays. I've been lucky enough in my life to work with new plays. I used to work with the Ojai Playwrights Conference out in West Coast, and I was able to work with Adam Rapp, who is a really well-known playwright now, and I got to work with him on one of his first incarnations of a play called Ghost in the Cottonwood, and it was wonderful having him in the audience, having him through rehearsals. Everything that I kept bringing out, and that set was basically designed out of a garbage, like a landfill, basically. It was designed out of a landfill. And everything that I kept putting on stage, and he loved it. And at one point, he literally changed the stage directions because of something I put up on the set and wrote it into the stage directions. So that's the kind of collaboration that you can have when a playwright is in the room. You can literally help them form the idea of where this is happening more clearly.
And I would assume also that when you're, let's say, designing for Chester Theater, which is a real small space, and I'm not sure, I know it's I've been there for performances, it's in the Town Hall Auditorium. Can they keep the set up for the duration of the run, or do they have to pull it down for selectmen meetings and stuff?
No, they keep it up for the duration of the run. They're shorter runs, I think, because they have to get so many shows in that summer. And I believe that the town takes the summer off in terms of town business that happens in that auditorium. They take the summer off so that Chester can do that. It's kind of an agreement they have with the town.
But I would assume it's different designing for that theater than it might be for Shakespeare and Company that owns its facility and has storage space and things like that.
Oh, yes. Much, much different, yes. It's funny, my first show there with, Kristen and I did together was last year, was I and You. And I pushed myself right up to the back of that wall that's back there. And, it's just always surprising to me how small a theater space can be and still be effective. And that space is pretty small. And I don't think the audience is aware of how small it is, because a lot of us designers are really good at masking that. And then this year with the apartment, this Manhattan penthouse apartment, had to fit on this tiny, tiny little stage. So I literally didn't even use walls. We just used a black masking curtain and projected the hallways into the space. I mean, we called them hallway tubes because I actually had to project the hallways into the playing space because it's so small.
I was amazed how small it was. About 5 years ago, I was asked to MC a benefit that they had, and I ended up interviewing an author on stage. And the set was there from whatever the production was at the time. There is no backstage. There is no dressing room per se and all of that, but it was so compact. And then when you're sitting on that stage and you realize you can see the fifth row is so close, it's like you're performing in someone's living room. It was a very interesting experience because normally if I were to do this particular type of event, it would have been in a much larger theater. Yeah,
and that audience is right there with you, which I think is why and especially with this great programming that Daniel has, he's been picking some amazing plays. It's so intimate, being so small. It's so intimate and it's so intense that when you get really good actors and a really good story, you are riveted. You are there. You're in it with them. And I've heard so many audience walk out just stunned by how moved and how connected they were to the actors on stage.
Do you have a wish list of plays you'd love to design given the opportunity?
I do. And it's funny because I used to not like musicals, but I'm warming up to musicals. I've done a couple now, and I'm like, okay, it's not so bad. So one of them would be Cabaret. I would love to do Cabaret. That's a powerful musical that I think has stuck with me since I was a little kid. So in terms of a play, I would love to do Glass Menagerie. I love Tennessee Williams. I've always loved Tennessee Williams, and that play is kind of close to home for me. And
I'm so excited. It actually opens at Barrington Stage. I'm getting to see it on Sunday.
Yes.
I've only seen one production of it when I was in college, and it was a college production. I've never seen a professional production of it before. And it's one of those plays that stuck with me over the years as being just such a beautiful piece of theater.
Oh, yeah. And the one that always sticks with me, actually, is the film version with Joanne Woodward and John Malkovich. And I think it was Karen Allen was the young girl.
Right. Karen Allen played Laura, and she's another Berkshire's artist, which is kind of cool.
Yes, he is, yeah. Yeah, and John Malkovich speaking those words, wow. I mean, that's some powerful theater.
Juliana, thanks for joining us this morning. We don't always get a chance to talk with people that are working behind the scenes, and I hope it gives our audience more of an insight into what it makes to put a play on the stage. And Juliana's work will be seen in the play Anne, the story of Anne Richards, starring Jane Atkinson, at Wham Theater, who will be performing that on the campus of Shakespeare and Company in Lenox. Go to whamtheater.org for ticket information, and this is a play that you need to buy tickets for in advance. And thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure.
Next week on Artsbeat Radio, we're going to be talking with Diane Perlman from the Berkshire Film and Media Collaborative about the upcoming Western Massachusetts Film and Media Exchange with Pilar Alessandra, taking place on October 20th at the Sheraton in Springfield, downtown. We'll also be talking with Jeffrey Dreisbach, who is with McCorkle Casting in New York, and he'll be talking about the audition process. And one of the cool things about Jeffrey Dreisbach is he's from Western Massachusetts as well, and he has a summer place up in Worthington. So another member of the creative economy here in our area. We're going to leave you this morning with some music from the Drowsy Chaperone, which is currently at Goodspeed Musicals. We'll see you next Friday here on Artsbeat Radio.
A bride and groom in a chapel may bring a tear to the eye, but what a thrill when lovebirds trill. I do in the sky when boughs are set in a bees and daffodils sigh, but heartbeats rush when sweethearts gush. I do in the sky. Do you? We do. Do you? We do. Do you? We do. Do you? We do. A bride and groom in a chapel may bring a tear to the eye, with rainbows bending before us and clouds meandering by. One can't restrain